Yushchenko and the new face of Ukraine. The new president narrowly survived an assassin's poison. Now he takes CNN's Christian Amanpour back through the tumultuous days of the Orange Revolution and the mysterious attempt on his life.
Hello and welcome. He's been in office for less than 2 weeks, but already Viktor Yushchenko has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The truth is, however long he serves as president, nothing he does in the job is likely to top what he went through to get it. Yushchenko not only rallied Ukrainians to demand democratic change from a government that refused it for years, he did it while suffering the debilitating and disfiguring effects of a bizarre poisoning. History and high drama combined. Now, CNN's Christian Amanpour, in a report produced by Andrew Tkach and a team at the CBS News program 60 Minutes, revisits the episode with the president himself. On our program today, the plot against Yushchenko in the first person.
In Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, the walls of St. Michael's Monastery of the Golden Domes resonate with a painful history. Demolished by Stalin's henchmen, this 12th century cathedral has been rebuilt from scratch, a task almost as monumental as the one faced by Ukraine's new president, Viktor Yushchenko.
On the day of your election, you prayed at the cathedral. Are you awed by the responsibility that's put on your shoulders now?
Yes, it's a huge responsibility. Ukrainians have dreamt of being free for centuries, so no one expected we'd come so close to dictatorship.
And that might have happened if the plot to poison Yushchenko had succeeded. As it is, it has completely disfigured him.
You challenged people about your face. You said that your face is the face of everything that's wrong with Ukraine. What do you mean by that?
People cry when they see my face. But my country has also been disfigured. Now we'll bring both back to health.
How do you deal with this now as a man?
This Yushchenko I'm still not used to.
This is what Yushchenko looked like only 6 months ago, when he began his campaign to unseat Ukraine's authoritarian rulers by returning home to seek his mother's blessing.
When you started in this idyllic, traditional moment, did you have any premonition, any idea that it would be so tough?
I know what kind of country I live in and who is in charge of the government. But I didn't think they'd be cynical enough to poison me.
Ignored by Ukraine's highly controlled media, Yushchenko's grassroots campaign against government corruption was somehow starting to catch on. He barnstormed the country with his American-born wife Catherine often at his side.
He was a great threat to the old system, to the system where there was a great deal of corruption, where people were making millions, if not billions.
Catherine, whose Ukrainian parents emigrated to Chicago, was used to straddling two worlds, but nothing prepared her for Ukraine's poison politics.
It's something out of an Agatha Christie novel, though, isn't it? That in 2004, a presidential candidate in the heart of Europe could be poisoned.
The whole purpose of what they did, I believe now, was to keep him out of the campaign, to knock him out. They tried to destroy him politically. And I always feared when they were not successful that they would try to then do something physically.
And look at these lovely children, all in orange. I must say, this is a symphony.
Deep in my heart, I very much feared that something would happen to our entire family.
And then suddenly it did. On September 6th, Yushchenko fell critically ill, and no one in Ukraine could explain why.
It was a very, very, very difficult situation. Many of the doctors told us that they just had never experienced somebody having so much pain for so many unknown reasons.
He had symptoms such as a swollen pancreas, stomach ulcers, and a crippling backache. Yushchenko's family rushed him to this clinic in Austria, but Dr. Michael Zimfer was just as baffled by his seemingly unrelated symptoms.
That made us suspicious. We informed the patient that we never saw an identical clinical picture before, and we suspect that there might be an act of bioterrorism or of poisoning behind that.
The doctors struggled to save his life, but they couldn't keep him in bed for long. 8 days later, Yushchenko insisted on going home, with tubes dripping painkillers inserted right into his spine.
Did you ever try to dissuade him?
My husband is not a man you can dissuade. He knew he had to go forward, and there was no turning back.
3 days after returning to Kiev, Yushchenko faced down his political enemies in parliament. They had mockingly attributed his mystery illness to bad sushi or excessive drinking. But no one could explain why his face was so horribly swollen.
Look at my face. This is a fraction of the problems I've had. And it's not a problem of cuisine. We're talking about the Ukrainian political kitchen, where assassinations can be ordered. You know very well who's the killer. It's the government.
Mr. President, do you know who did this to you specifically?
Безумовно, це зробили мої опоненти від влади.
I have no doubt this was done by my opponents in the government. That's who would benefit the most from my death.
But the government brushed off these allegations until the hard proof came in. 3 months after Yushchenko first fell ill, this lab in Amsterdam reported dioxin levels in his blood 6,000 times above normal. Dr. Bram Brouwer runs this lab.
This is the highest we've ever seen, and also one of the highest that's ever reported. And it fits very well with the symptoms that are now observed at Mr. Yushchenko's face, the chloracne.
The evidence that Yushchenko was poisoned was now irrefutable. Dioxin, one of the world's most toxic chemicals, was responsible for scarring his face and threatening his future with cancer. But the question remained, who carried out this crime? The attempt to eliminate Yushchenko is as Byzantine as Kiev's skyline, filled with plots and potential villains. One theory is that he was poisoned by Ukraine's security services, the old KGB, because just before he fell so gravely ill, he had been invited to dinner by the security chiefs. Yushchenko and his hosts had shared crayfish, salad, and a few beers. And ironically, they had been meeting to discuss the death threats against him.
Do you believe that you were poisoned at that now infamous dinner that you had in September with the head and the deputy head of the Ukrainian security services?
Це одна із версій, яка сьогодні.
That's just one of the versions.
Is it the version that you believe?
Скоріше всього.
Most likely.
But even if Yushchenko was poisoned at that dinner, some think the director of Ukraine's security services, the SBU, may have been set up because he was helping the Yushchenko camp. Oleg Rybachuk is Yushchenko's chief of staff.
Why would the SBU, who have been cooperating with your camp during the election campaign, poison your candidate?
SBU wouldn't do this. This is not in the interest of SBU. But it's not a big secret that there were some deputy clearly on the payroll of organized crime.
We're talking of billions of dollars of revenue.
Roman Svarich, born in New York City, is a key member of Yushchenko's coalition in parliament.
The backroom deals that were completed, some of which were done in the president's office, I'm very much certain of this, indicate that my country for the last 10 years was run in effect by a mafia/political group of criminals.
Because Yushchenko promised to clean all this up, Svarich is not surprised someone tried to stop him.
This was a mafia-style hit.
In December, Kiev was hit by a string of suspicious suicides. A prominent banker of Ukraine's former ruler somehow slit his own throat with a letter opener. And the outgoing Minister of Transport, who had supervised some of Ukraine's biggest construction projects, supposedly shot himself with a pistol.
Я відношусь до тих людей, які рахують, що його вбили.
I side with the people who think he was killed.
Clearly, the previous regime never expected to lose. Do you think they are behind that in order to cover their tracks?
Якщо коротко відповідь.
Those who are afraid of facing justice are committing such acts.
And getting rid of Yushchenko may be part of the same plan. But there is still the question of how it was done. One way to solve it would be to trace the poison.
Do you have any idea where the dioxin came from that poisoned you? Some people in your camp think that it came from a Russian chemical weapons lab.
Діоксин виробляється в 4-5 лабораторіях світу.
Dioxin like this is produced in 4 or 5 military labs in Russia, America, and few other countries. Our security services have informed me how this material got into Ukraine. But that evidence is now with our general prosecutor, who eventually must answer this question.
They must also examine another plot on his life. Ukraine's security services say a powerful car bomb targeting Yushchenko's headquarters was discovered during the presidential campaign, and 2 Russian nationals are being interrogated. Spokesman for Russia's security services would not comment on either case. But President Putin's role during the election remains controversial. He openly backed the hand-picked successor of the previous regime, coming to Kiev twice to lend his support.
One of your most important world neighbors is obviously Russia. President Putin supported your opponent during the election. How do you reconcile with him?
Я подам руку і скажу.
I'll give him my hand and say, Vladimir Vladimirovich, let's forget the past and think of the future.
Last week, he did just that, greeting President Putin on his first trip abroad since his inauguration.
Ясно зрозуміють, що
Everyone now understands only Ukrainians have the right to choose Ukraine's president. Our president is not elected in Moscow or anywhere else.
That became clear when the previous regime tried to steal the presidential election and instead triggered what became known as the Orange Revolution.
It's a revolution, it's like a war. And we understand, so we are like soldiers.
Democracy started to mean something finally.
It was great love, a great friendship. It was maybe the best days in my life.
But euphoria quickly turned to raw fear when rumors spread that government troops were about to clear the streets.
It was a very critical period. Reports were coming in that they were ready to march, that they were going to shoot. There were orders, as far as we know, to arm and load.
I was ready to die, really, because I realized that this is the first and maybe the last chance just to change something.
But the contacts established between security forces and Yushchenko's camp averted what could have been a European-style Tiananmen Square. That and the people's power of persuasion.
I was in first row and I saw women stick flowers and shields of soldiers. I had the feeling that this is something unbelievable. That's why maybe people just went on streets, to guarantee that our Soviet, this criminal, past will never come back again.
When Ukraine's Supreme Court annulled the fraudulent vote and Yushchenko trounced his opponent in a free and fair election, the tension that had frozen Kiev's streets melted away. Hundreds of thousands of people were still gathering on Kiev's Independence Square. But now they weren't protesting, they were celebrating. And Yushchenko and all those who had believed in him triumphed in a bloodless revolution.
The millions who came out on the streets showed they don't want tyranny, they want freedom.
At what price, that freedom?
Everyone has paid a price.
A lot of people asked me, how did you deal with it? And my answer was always, my husband's alive. My children are alive. I'm alive. It was such a small episode in a huge revolution. Generations of Ukrainians, you could say centuries of Ukrainians, have dreamed and have fought and have died for the chance to be right where we are right now.
Yushchenko! Yushchenko! Буде залишена кримінальна влада.
Now will live forever this criminal government and all its torture and lies. To all of you who made it possible, I bow down in thanks. When I heard that millions were praying for me, it went straight to my heart. But I also felt an obligation to live. To die is not very original, but to live and carry on, that's special.
We take a break now. When we come back, a look at what the president is planning now. Stay with us.
Behind every great man, there is a great woman. Viktor Yushchenko has his wife, of course, but he also has Yulia Tymoshenko. Tymoshenko is a passionate reformer whose rousing speeches rallied Ukrainians in the tense days of the presidential contest. She was a controversial choice, though, as the country's new prime minister. She's one of Ukraine's wealthiest women, and authorities in both Ukraine and Russia have tried to press criminal charges against her for corruption.
Welcome back. Thursday, the new prime minister will present herself and her cabinet to the Ukrainian parliament for a vote of confidence. And then the president and his prime minister and her team will have their hands full.